Can we all stand? Anyone who can stand for the pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. May I have a roll call to establish a quorum?
Director Asner. Here. Director Moeller. Here. Director Sartorius.
Here.
Director Suda. Vice President.
Yes.
Here. Now tonight's agenda, Dr. McInerney, it's all
Great.
yours.
Thank you. Tonight, we will hear from CFO Cindy Rodman, who will lead us in a discussion related to our draft for FY26 budget.
Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Staton, and Board of Education. I'm assuming you can see the slide deck that we're going to cover tonight. Excellent, thank you. So on the agenda slide tonight, we're going to talk about two very important fiscal items that have previously been previewed and discussed with the Finance Committee on January 31st at our meeting. We're going to update the Board of Education on the fiscal year 2025 budget, which has now been reconciled through the December financial statements that the board received on the January 31st Friday informational packet. In addition, we're going to, Mark, if you'll go to the next slide for agenda. Thank you. In addition, I want to introduce the budget document format for the fiscal year 26 budget preparation and why this format's important and why I find it valuable for the district. Next slide. So let's start with the fiscal year 25 budget update and forecast. Next slide. I want to keep presenting this in front of the board so that we stay on top of it and it stays forefront in our mind. These are the slides that I want to remind the board that we were on a trajectory downward. Our goal is to stay around that 35% fund balance goal. Next slide. This is the new summary of revenues, expenditures, and fund balances that we are providing to the Board of Education each time that we present budget amendments. This allows the board and the community to see, based on those budget amendments that are being proposed and approved by the Board of Education, what the overall budget is going to look like once those changes are approved. The revised budget totals include the December 10th budget adjustments that were approved at that board meeting. Next slide. Again, this is fiscal year 25 budget for all funds. This kind of helps us keep it in perspective for operating, which is our general and special revenue funds, as well as our capital funds. And these statements have been reconciled as of December. I am in receipt of the January financials, and I'm working through those January monthly financials as we speak. Next slide. This is the fiscal year 25 budget for those operating funds for just the general and special revenue funds only. And again, they've been reconciled through the December monthly financial statements. The importance of this slide is the fact that we're showing our fund balance, which is based on a general fund and special revenue fund basis. Next slide. I want to remind the board that as we review the monthly financials, we are looking at the non-wage cost containment possibilities as well. So this was information that was gleaned from the November 2024 monthly financials. And again, I'm looking at these categories every time I review the monthly financials. So this analysis will continue each month as the financials are presented. Next slide. This is the fiscal year 25 forecast for the operating funds. So again, for the general and special revenue funds only. Again, I want to keep the forecasting in front of the Board of Education so that we know, based on the decisions that are being made this year, what decisions or strategies we may have to implement in the future years. I want to also inform the board that we're trying to use those fine-tune those strategies so that we can stay at that 35% fund balance goal percentage. In addition, this information was shared again at the Finance Committee. And just so the board can know, former CFO Rich Carver did concur with my percentages at this moment in time. But just please keep in mind that I will keep monitoring these percentages throughout the year as we fine tune our forecast for this year as well as outlying years going forward. Next slide. So that was FY25 budget information. Now I want to focus on the FY26 budget document that will be presented to the board for final approval in May, and we'll go through the timeline at the end. Next slide, please, Mark. So I wanted to introduce the board to the national association I belong to, the Association of School Business Officials International, or ASBO. And what they offer and encourage is a pathway for school districts to follow in order to present an accessible and accurate budget, which builds trust and clearly communicates our budget with our stakeholders. This, in my opinion, is the gold standard and one in which I have implemented in other school districts previously, presenting a meritorious budget award budget. Next slide. I shared the checklist with the Finance Committee. It's about 10 to 12 pages long, but it includes the checklist and the components that each school district has to meet in order to present a high quality budget to our community. And so by following this format and checklist and the standard, it increases our credibility. It provides clarity and transparency, as well as communicates any future budget concerns or challenges special school district might have. And so it's a great opportunity to really communicate budget information to our stakeholders. In the next following slides, we'll cover the main 4 parts of the meritorious budget. Next slide. The executive summary is supposed to be liftable. It's supposed to be a standalone. It includes information from all of the other sections, which some people may find repetitive. However, it does allow for a standalone liftable component for a stakeholder to take away and read and get the major themes of the budget as presented. Next slide. The organizational section includes a lot of information about the district. The overview, it's our history. I usually include maps and our school directory. It is a vast resource to community members or our stakeholders that might not be as familiar with the special school district and how we operate and the students that we serve. Next slide. The financial section is, as we would say, probably the meat and potatoes of the budget, right? It includes a variety of information about the budget financially. Some levels are mandatory. They must be included. Level 1 is all funds, which we showed previously on the slide for FY25 budget. Level 2 is the operating funds. Again, the general and special revenue funds, which we also showed in our budget presentation for FY25. And then level 3 are the individual funds, where we would show each of the individual funds by themselves and what is going on with them. So most importantly, that would include the capital projects fund budget and its presentation. Level 4 really includes buildings, departments. It's more granular by program, by location. And that is an optional component. We do not have to choose to go into that detail should we not want to. But it is important to understand that the financial information presented in the financial section must include 8 years of data. So it's 3 years of actual data, the current budget, the proposed budget. So in this case, the proposed budget would be fiscal year 26, and then 3 years of forecast. Again, it reinforces the importance of looking ahead based on the decisions that are being made in the current year as to what it will do in forecasting years. Next slide, please. And last but not least is the informational section. So this is where it really is what it says, an informational section, including typically I include assessed valuation information, tax rate information, both historical and projected, revenue calculations. So I would include the weighted average daily attendance calculation as well as the formula calculations, any enrollment data that we would want to share in our student demographics, our faculty information data, staffing data, surveys that we do with parents or students or staff. And then I always include a glossary of terms and acronyms because education always loves their acronyms, and we have so many terms that not the average budget reader might be familiar with. So just kind of helps kind of close that information for the reader of the budget. I think you've been provided with a draft budget at your seats. The current budget handout is a draft. I can't reinforce that enough. It is continually changing due to the assumptions, right? So a budget is made up of various assumptions. And so as the state legislature and the governor are proposing their budgets and working through that process, as the Federal Open Market Committee determines what's happening with interest rates, et cetera, all the different components and assumptions that's happening, assess valuation, information, things that are happening with the senior property tax freeze, all those assumptions are continuously changing right now. And so the goal of tonight is to focus primarily on how the budget document is designed, how it's organized, and the information that it contains. That way, when we bring the final budget to the board in May, you can understand the basis of the budget document and focus on the information that's actually being presented, the financial information, et cetera. And then finally, I wanted to close with a budget timeline just to kind of keep the board informed as to what my thoughts are and how I want to get the work done. A full draft is planned to be completed by April 30th. And then we'll reconvene the Finance Committee to review the draft on May 9th. And then that draft presentation will come to the board at a work study on May 13th. And then we'll do a budget presentation and approval at the 5/27 Board of Education business meeting, the May 27th meeting. And then we'll ratify the budget at the June 2nd Governing Council meeting. So I just kind of wanted to let the board know what the timeline is of completing this budget document and sharing it with the board and the governing council. And then finally, last slide, do you have any questions for me about the process, about the document in general, or why I'm doing this, why I present a budget in such a way?
Anyone? I have one quick question. One of which, Cindy, thank you. I know that you're under the weather. Thank you for presenting tonight. You did an excellent job, and I just want to thank you for presenting. But my question is, how does this tie in with the timelines that we have for the audit? Our yearly our audit that we always have.
So right now, the auditors will come in for in June, do an interim audit, but it will be on FY25. So the auditors will actually be auditing FY25 budget information, and this will be for FY26 budget document going forward. So yeah, sometimes I'm working 3 years at the same time with the auditors in the past and the budget in the future. But yeah, it'll be continuous, but it will be a different fiscal year.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone?
I have a question. Yes, thank you for the presentation. I think you mentioned that we're going to be moving from accrual to actual in the future. Is that, will you remind me when and how we're doing that?
Yes, Director Suda. Great question. So, and I even got confirmation at a meeting this last week from GFOA. So our state only requires fund financial statements, which means we can present our financial statements on a modified accrual basis. We currently do an accrual basis throughout the year, but we're going to move to a cash basis throughout the year. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more explainable and understandable when we're talking cash basis, because then we can say, this is what we budgeted and this is what we actually received. It's a more linear approach to the numbers that are being presented. So we'll move away from a full accrual presentation, which means we won't have to do like depreciation of assets and those kind of GASB standards in the future. We'll just present on a modified accrual statement, which is still in alignment with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. So our audit will still align with GAAP. We just won't go forward with all the GASB pronouncements and GASB accruals that we call full accrual. Does that help?
It does, and I think that's what I've had experience with on other boards and in other places. I think it's easier to understand. So I'm looking forward to it.
I agree. I am too. So to continue, so we're gonna finish out this year as we have in the past. We'll do a modified accrual audit for FY 25, and then we'll move into cash basis operations for FY 26, with again doing a modified accrual audit for FY 26.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that last part, that timeline. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
If there are no other questions, that concludes the superintendent reports tonight. Turn it back over to Dr. Sweeney.
All right. That means, would someone like to make a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
All in favor? Second.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? Motion carries. Board study is over. Let's go back. Let's take 5 minutes if anyone needs to go to